Hello, dear listeners. Let's begin today's story.
The envelope had no return address. It was sitting on the bottom porch step when I came around from the back field that Tuesday afternoon. Plain white, no stamp, no postmark, just my name in block letters. Walter Greer, not Walt. The way my mother wrote it when she meant business. I stood there with my work gloves still on, looking at it. Hank hadn't barked. No car had come up the gravel drive. Whoever left it had done so without making a sound. I picked it up and went inside. The kitchen still smelled like morning coffee. Susan's lavender sachets hung in the window above the sink. Faded now, 3 years on, but I hadn't taken them down. Her reading chair sat in the corner with a paperback on the armrest. 40 pages in, bookmark still holding her place. Moving it felt wrong. So it stayed. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a single newspaper clipping, folded twice. The paper gone soft at the edges. I unfolded it carefully. The Charleston Courier, November 14th, 2018. The headline read, "Widower loses $7.4 million in alleged romance fraud scheme." Beneath it, a photograph. Blurry, taken from a distance. A woman walking out of a courthouse, head turned slightly away. Beside her, an older man leaning on a cane. The caption read, "Harold Finch, 71, with an unidentified companion." I read the article twice. Harold Finch, a retired attorney from Charleston, met a woman named Claire Whitfield at a gallery opening in spring of 2017. Within 4 months, they were engaged. Within 8 months, married. Within 14 months, his accounts had been restructured, his properties transferred. A medical power of attorney filed naming Claire as sole decision-maker. 3 months after the divorce, Harold was found unresponsive in his home. He survived, but he spent his remaining years in a care facility, alone. His family financially destroyed. Claire Whitfield was never charged. She had disappeared. I looked at the photograph again. The woman's face was turned away, but something about the angle of her jaw made me lean closer. I tilted the paper toward the window to catch the last of the afternoon light. Grainy, small, taken from 30 yards at least. But her eyes. In the half-second she'd glanced back toward the camera. Her eyes were sharp and clear. I'd seen those eyes 2 weeks ago, across a dinner table, laughing at one of Noah's stories, resting a hand on my son's arm with the easy confidence of someone who had already decided how things were going to go. I put the clipping down. Outside, the peach trees along the south fence were in full bloom. Susan always loved them in April. Noah was getting married in 6 weeks. He'd been happier these past few months than I'd seen him since we lost his mother. He called every Sunday. He'd started laughing again. The real kind. Clara Whitfield had given him that. Clara, not Claire. One letter different. I thought about coincidences. I thought about the things a man can talk himself out of when he wants to badly enough. I thought about my son's face the first time he introduced her. The pride in it. The relief. The particular happiness of a man who has been lonely for a long time and finally believes that part of his life is over. Then I stood up, folded the clipping, put it in my shirt pocket, and went upstairs to change. I had a rehearsal dinner to get to. Forsyth Park was lit up that evening the way Savannah does it best. Spanish moss hanging low over the fountain. Gas lanterns throwing warm gold light across the square. The restaurant was tucked into a restored townhouse on the south side of the park. Dark wood and exposed brick. I heard the noise before I opened the door. Laughter. Clinking glasses. A party that didn't know it might be a mistake. Noah found me almost immediately, cutting through the crowd with that walk he'd had since he was 12. Chin up, shoulders back, always trying to look older than he was. He was beaming. "Dad, you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He pulled me in, and there she was. Clara Whitfield stood near the fireplace in a blue dress, talking to a couple I didn't recognize, laughing at something the woman had said. She was 32, dark-haired, composed the way someone is when they're always aware of exactly how they look. She turned when Noah said her name, and her smile arrived warm and fast, a half-second too fast, the way a smile does when it's been practiced. She crossed the room and took both my hands. "Mr. Greer, I've heard so much about you." "Walt," I said. "Please." "Walt." She tried it out. "Noah talks about you constantly. The farm, the history classes, the way you used to quiz him on Civil War generals at breakfast." She laughed softly. "I feel like I already know you." "Likewise," I said. Then she looked at me. Not a glance. A look. The kind that takes a measurement. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the smile came back and she was already turning away, her hand light on my arm as she moved on, graceful and unhurried. But in those 2 seconds, her eyes had been completely still. I reached into my shirt pocket and touched the folded edge of the clipping. The envelope had no return address. Inside was a photograph so blurry I almost threw it away. I wish I had. Because the moment I recognized those eyes, my son's wedding, and everything I thought I knew about the woman he loved, was already over. I got a bourbon from the bar and found a spot near the back wall where I could see the whole room. 30 years of teaching history taught me one thing above everything else. If you want to understand what's really happening, don't look at the center of the room. Look at the edges. Look at who's watching who. Look at the people who are trying too hard to look natural. The Whitfield family was trying too hard. Clara's father, Edward Whitfield, stood near the fireplace holding a glass of red wine he hadn't touched. Tall man, late 60s, silver hair combed back clean. He laughed at the right moments, nodded at the right moments, but his eyes moved around the room on a slight delay, a half beat behind wherever the conversation was, like a man reading from a script he'd memorized but didn't fully understand. Clara's mother sat beside him, small and neat in a gray dress, smiling at everything equally. The smile never changed. Same width, same warmth, same timing. I'd seen smiles like that before, on people who had practiced them in mirrors. The younger sister stood near the drinks table talking to 2 of Noah's friends. She was good, better than the parents. Her laugh came easy, her body language open. But twice I watched her glance at Clara across the room, quick and checking, the way an actor looks to the director from the stage. I set my glass down and walked over to Edward Whitfield. "Walter Greer," I said, extending my hand. "Noah's father." "Edward." His handshake was firm and dry. "Wonderful evening. Noah's a fine young man. You've raised him well." "Thank you. Clara tells me your family is from Charleston originally." Something moved behind his eyes. Quick. Gone in a second. "That's right," he said. "Charleston area. Moved around quite a bit over the years. What part of Charleston? He smiled and took a sip of his wine for the first time. South of Broad, mostly. Beautiful part of the city. Do you know it? I didn't push. I filed it away. Noah appeared at my elbow, one arm around Clara, both of them flushed and happy. Dad, isn't she something, he said, looking at Clara the way I remembered looking at Susan at that age. Like she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. I looked at my son, 28 years old. Susan's eyes, Susan's laugh. He'd spent 2 years grieving his mother so quietly I'd worried about him. And then Clara had come along and the grief had lifted and he'd become himself again. She's something, I said. Clara smiled at me over Noah's shoulder. That same smile. Fast and warm and landing a half-second too early. After the dinner, I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 10 minutes before turning the key. I called my old colleague Jim Bastian, who'd taught Georgia history at the high school 2 towns over before retiring to Charleston. Jim knew everybody in that city. We'd kept in touch over the years. I got his voicemail. Jim, it's Walt Greer. Give me a call when you get a chance. I have a question about somebody you might know. No rush. I paused. Actually, some rush. Call me tomorrow if you can. I drove home on dark country roads with the windows down and the clipping folded in my shirt pocket, and the Georgia night coming in warm and full of pine. The house was quiet when I got back. Hank met me at the door, tail low, which was unusual. He was 12 years old, gray around the muzzle, moved slower than he used to, but he was still alert, still watchful. Susan used to say that Dog understood more English than most people she'd met. She'd also said, more than once, that Hank was the best judge of character in the household. Better than me, she'd say, and she wasn't entirely wrong. He followed me to the kitchen and lay down under the table while I spread the newspaper clipping flat under the overhead light. I looked at it for a long time. Claire. Clara. The Charleston connection Edward Whitfield had deflected. The smile that arrived too fast. The eyes that went still for 2 seconds when she looked at me across a room full of noise and candlelight. A man can talk himself out of anything if the stakes are high enough. My son was happy. He was healed. He was in love. And I was sitting in my kitchen at 11:30 at night with a 6-year-old newspaper clipping and a bad feeling in my chest. And the only evidence I had was a blurry photograph and the memory of a woman's eyes going quiet for 2 seconds. I looked up at the photo of Noah and Susan on the refrigerator, taken the summer before she died. Noah with his arm around her shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun. Both of them laughing at something I'd said just before I took the picture. I couldn't remember what it was anymore. Susan always said I worried too much, but Susan also said trust your gut. Walt. She said it so many times over 35 years that it had become less advice and more reflex. Trust your gut. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it costs you something. My gut was not quiet that night. I folded the clipping, put it back in my pocket, and looked at Hank under the table. He looked back at me with those steady amber eyes. What do you think? I said. He put his chin down on his front paws and exhaled slowly. That was enough for me. I was up at 5:45. Didn't sleep much. Lay in the dark, listening to the house settle and thinking about a woman's eyes going still across a crowded room. At some point, Hank climbed up onto the foot of the bed, which I normally didn't allow, and I didn't say anything. Some nights the house feels very large. By 6, I had coffee made and the clipping on the table and my laptop open. I'd spent 30 years teaching history. Research was the one thing I knew how to do without thinking. You start with what you have. You follow what it points to. You don't assume. You verify. What I had was a name. Claire Whitfield. Charleston, South Carolina. 2017. 2018. I started there. The article itself was thin on details, the way local crime reporting often is when charges are never filed. Harold Finch, 71, retired maritime attorney. Romance fraud, alleged. $7.4 million. No arrest. Case closed for lack of actionable evidence. I found 2 follow-up pieces, both short. One mentioned that Harold had been moved to a long-term care facility in Mount Pleasant. The other mentioned that Claire Whitfield could not be located for comment. I searched the name in 6 different combinations. Claire Whitfield, Charleston. Claire Whitfield, South Carolina. Claire Whitfield, fraud. Nothing useful came back. No social media, no professional listings, no photographs beyond the one blurry courthouse shot. Whoever she was, she'd been careful about her footprint. Then I searched Harold Finch. His daughter's name was Patricia. Patricia Finch Moreau, Boston, Massachusetts. She had a LinkedIn profile, sparse but current. Grief counselor. I found a comment she'd left on a consumer protection forum 2 years back, under a thread about elder fraud. She'd written, if anyone has information about a woman using the name Claire Whitfield or similar, please contact me directly. My father was her victim. She is still out there. I wrote down her number and called it at 6:45. She picked up on the second ring. Patricia Finch. My name is Walter Greer, I said. I'm calling from Savannah, Georgia. I think the woman who took your father's money is about to marry my son. A long silence. Then quietly, she's doing it again, isn't she? It wasn't a question. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. I made a second pot of coffee and didn't touch it. Patricia Finch Moreau was 51 years old, precise and controlled in the way of someone who has had to repeat a painful story many times and learned to do it without breaking. Her father Harold had been a kind man, she said. Lonely after her mother passed. Not naive, not foolish, just human. Claire Whitfield had approached him at a gallery opening. Within weeks, she was calling twice a day. Within months, she had moved in. The pattern, Patricia said, was exact. First came access. Small things. Keys to the house. Account logins for his convenience. Introductions to his attorney. Then came dependence. Harold began relying on Claire for appointments, for medication management, for financial decisions. Then came the paperwork, power of attorney, updated will, medical directives. Then Harold started forgetting things. By the time Patricia realized what was happening, the accounts had been drained through a series of transfers to entities that no longer existed. Her father's home had been refinanced. His investment portfolio had been liquidated. $7.4 million, accumulated over 40 years of careful work, gone in 14 months. Claire Whitfield vanished the same week the divorce was filed. She didn't just take his money, Patricia said. She took the last years of his life. He spent them in a facility in Mount Pleasant, not always knowing who I was. He died believing he had failed us. Her voice stayed even. He hadn't failed anyone. She had simply been very good at what she does. I asked if she knew of any other victims. 2 confirmed, she said. Eugene Marsh, Atlanta, David Keller, Charlotte. Different names each time, but the same method, same timeline, same result. She paused. There may be others I haven't found. After we hung up, I went to the back room I used as an office and took down the Georgia road map I kept pinned to the wall. I replaced it with a blank sheet of butcher paper from the kitchen drawer, old habit from 30 years of lesson planning. When something is too large to hold in your head, you put it on the wall. I wrote 4 names: Harold Finch, Boston; Eugene Marsh, Atlanta; David Keller, Charlotte; Clara Whitfield, Savannah. I drew lines between the cities. I noted the dates. I noted the amounts where I had them. I stood back and looked at it the way I used to stand back from a chalkboard after laying out a campaign map for a Civil War unit. There was a pattern. There was always a pattern. History had taught me that much. Men and women who do terrible things rarely invent new methods. They refine old ones. They get better at the same thing. They move on when the risk gets too high and start again somewhere new with a different name and the same eyes. I wrote one more name at the bottom of the paper. Noah Greer. I stared at it for a while. My son's name on a map of damage. Then I circled it and drew a line from Clara Whitfield's name down to his. Patricia had said she'd send me everything she had: documents, photographs, bank records, correspondence. She said she'd been waiting 2 years for someone to call her with news like this. Mr. Greer, she said before we hung up. Be careful. She is very good at reading people. She will know if you're onto her before you know you've shown it. I taught high school history for 30 years, I said. I know how to keep a straight face. A pause. Then, almost to herself, my father thought he was careful too. The FedEx package from Patricia arrived Thursday morning. I wasn't expecting it until Friday. She'd worked fast. The box was heavier than I expected. Maybe 8 pounds. Brown cardboard with her name in the return address corner, and personal and confidential, printed twice in red ink. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table and stood there looking at it for a moment before I opened it. There's a particular feeling that comes before you learn something you can't unlearn. A stillness. A sense of the last quiet moment before the door opens. I'd felt it once before, standing in a hospital corridor while a doctor walked toward me from the other end. I felt it now. I cut the tape and opened the box. Patricia had organized everything the way a careful person organizes grief. Labeled folders, chronological order, a typed index on top. Bank statements, transfer records, property filings, a copy of the power of attorney document, notarized. Claire Whitfield's signature at the bottom in a clean, confident hand. Photographs, correspondence. A timeline she had constructed herself, year by year, event by event. The slow dismantling of her father's life laid out in 12 pages of single-spaced type. I read for 2 hours without stopping. Then I went looking for the insurance documents I needed for the farm's annual renewal, which I kept in a filing box on the shelf above the stairs. The box wasn't where I thought I'd left it. I checked the hall closet, the office. Eventually, I remembered I'd moved some things to the attic the previous fall when I'd repainted the upstairs hallway. The attic stairs were narrow, and the light up there was a single bare bulb on a pull cord. I found the filing box in the first corner I checked, and beside it, pushed against the east wall under the slope of the roof, was a cardboard box I recognized by the handwriting on the side. Susan's handwriting. 3 letters. Mom. I stood there for a moment. dust in the air, the smell of old wood and something faint beneath it, something I hadn't encountered in a long time. Lavender. Not the sachets in the kitchen, which had faded to almost nothing. Something stronger. Something that had been sealed in and preserved. I brought the box downstairs. I set it on the kitchen table next to Patricia's files and sat down. The box was sealed with packing tape, the kind Susan used on everything. 2 strips across the top, neat and parallel. Inside a folded quilt her mother had made, a small wooden box of jewelry. 2 paperback novels with her name written inside the front cover. A manila envelope of photographs from before we were married. And at the very bottom, beneath everything else, a journal. Dark green cover. No label. A rubber band holding it closed. Susan had kept journals since college. I knew that. She'd never made a secret of it. She'd also never invited me to read them, and I had never asked. That was the agreement, unspoken, the way most real agreements between people who love each other are unspoken. I held the journal for a while without opening it. Then I thought about the band Joe on my office wall with Noah's name circled at the bottom. I thought about Patricia's father spending his last years in a facility in Mount Pleasant, not knowing where he was. I thought about Clara Whitfield's eyes going completely still for 2 seconds in a room full of candlelight and laughter. I opened the journal. Susan's handwriting was small and even. The handwriting of a woman who had written a great deal over a long life. I turned to the last entries. January, February, March of 2022. The year she died, she wrote about ordinary things the way she always had. The garden, a book she was reading, a disagreement with the woman who ran the historical society about the date of a local event. Noah calling from Atlanta, excited about a photography exhibit he was preparing. She wrote about me in the third person, which she'd always done. Walt did this. Walt said that. With a dry affection I recognized as love. Then I found the entry dated March 9th, 2022. She wrote Noah's exhibit opening tonight at the gallery on Bull Street. Went alone since Walt had the school board meeting. Beautiful work. He's grown so much as an artist. But something strange happened. A woman approached me near the end of the evening, said she was a friend of Noah's, asked questions about the family. Very charming, very interested. She asked about the farm, about Walt's retirement, about whether Noah was close with his father. I answered politely, and then made an excuse to move on. But I've been thinking about it since I got home. Something deeply wrong with that woman's eyes. Like looking at a painting of a person instead of a person. I sat very still. I turned the page. March 11th, March 13th. Susan writing about the garden, about a phone call with her sister, about a recipe she wanted to try. Then March 14th, saw that woman again today. She was having coffee at the place on Whitaker Street when I walked past. She waved at me like we were old friends. I didn't stop. But she was on her phone and she looked up when I passed and smiled, and there was nothing behind it. I need to tell Walt about her. Tomorrow. I want to think about how to say it first. March 14th, 2022. I closed the journal. The accident had happened on March 15th. A wet road on the way back from her sister's house in Statesboro. A curve taken too fast, according to the police report. Single vehicle, no witnesses. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The house was very quiet. Hank came in from the living room and put his head in my lap, and I rested my hand on him without thinking about it. Susan had seen her. Susan had known something was wrong. Susan had been one day away from telling me. I picked the journal back up and read the last entry one more time. I need to tell Walt about her. Tomorrow. I sat with that word for a long time. Tomorrow. Susan had written it at the end of a Tuesday evening, at the kitchen table or in the reading chair or wherever she went when she wanted to think quietly. She had seen something that troubled her. She had decided to tell me. She had given herself one more day to find the right words, the way she always did, because Susan never said an important thing carelessly. She never got the day. I'm not a man who falls apart easily. 35 years of marriage, 2 decades in a classroom, a farm that doesn't run itself. You learn to keep moving. You learn that the work is what holds you together when nothing else does. After Susan died, I had kept moving because stopping felt like something I might not come back from. But sitting at that kitchen table with her journal in my hands and the afternoon light coming through her lavender sachets in the window, I let myself be still for a few minutes. Just still. Not crying. Not thinking. Just sitting with the weight of one more thing she had tried to do for us and hadn't been able to finish. Then I put the journal down, went to the office and looked at the wall. 4 names, 4 cities, lines connecting them. Noah's name at the bottom with a circle around it. I picked up a red marker and added a 5th name above Noah's. Susan Greer. Savannah. March 15th, 2022. I drew a line from Clara Whitfield's name down to Susan's, then from Susan's down to Noah's. I stood back and looked at it. Maybe it was nothing. A wet road. A curve. These things happen. The police report had been straightforward. No other vehicles involved. No evidence of mechanical failure. Susan had been driving back from her sister's house in Statesboro on a road she'd taken 100 times. But she had been one day away from telling me about Clara. And now she was gone and Clara was still here, moving through our lives like she owned them. I didn't know. I still don't know. But I wrote the name on the wall because a historian's job is to record what happened, not to decide in advance what it means. That evening I called Rebecca Ayers. Rebecca was the daughter of my cousin Robert, who had lived in Memphis and died in the spring of 2021. Heart failure, the death certificate said. He'd been 67 years old and in reasonable health for his age, a little overweight, but nothing that had alarmed his doctors. It had been sudden. I'd driven to Memphis for the funeral and come back with the particular sadness of a man who has lost someone he should have stayed in better touch with. Robert had been a good man, funny, generous, the kind of man who remembered your birthday and showed up with beer when you were building a fence. After his wife passed in 2019, he'd been lonely. His daughter had told me at the funeral. He'd started going out more, meeting people. I hadn't thought about it again until I'd opened Patricia's box that morning and found, tucked in the back of the photographs folder, a printout of a wedding announcement from a Memphis Society page. 2019. Robert Ayers and a woman named Carol Whitmore. I'd almost missed it. The names were different, but the photograph. I called Rebecca at 7 in the evening. She answered on the 3rd ring, surprised to hear from me, warm the way Robert's family always was. We caught up for a few minutes. Then I asked her to pull up the wedding announcement photograph on her phone and tell me what the woman looked like. A pause while she searched. Then dark hair, kind of shoulder length, really pretty, slim. She's smiling at the camera, but her eyes are... She stopped. Her eyes are what? I said. It's a strange thing to say about a wedding photo. Rebecca said slowly, but her eyes look like she's somewhere else entirely. I closed mine for a second. Rebecca, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Before your father passed, did he say anything to you that seemed unusual about the woman he was with? Or about being afraid of something? Or about wanting to tell you something? A long silence. Then Rebecca said, "The week before he died, he called me on a Sunday, which he did every week. But at the end of the call, he said something he'd never said before. He said, and I remember this exactly because it was so unlike him. He said, 'Don't let her in. Becca, whatever happens, don't let her in.' I asked him what he meant, and he said, 'Never mind. Forget I said it,' and changed the subject." Her voice was careful now. "I've thought about that a lot since he died. I never understood what he was warning me about." "I think I do," I said. I stayed on with her for another 20 minutes, explaining carefully, leaving out nothing that mattered. By the end, she was quiet in the way people go quiet when something they've half known for a long time is finally named out loud. After we hung up, I went back to the wall and added one more name. Robert Ayers. Memphis. 2021. Then I drew a line from Clara Whitfield down to Robert. Then from Robert down to the bottom of the page. 6 names now, 6 lines, all of them pointing in the same direction. She showed up Monday morning with peach muffins. 7:15. I heard the knock and came downstairs to find Clara on the front porch in jeans and a cream sweater, holding a white bakery box, smiling like a neighbor returning a borrowed dish. "I was up early baking," she said. "Noah told me you're a morning person." "That's thoughtful," I said. "We're going to be family. Walt. Easy. Practiced. I want you to know you can count on me." I stood back and let her in. She moved through my kitchen with that unhurried confidence, opening the right cabinet on the first try, filling the kettle without asking where I kept it. Small things. The kind you notice when you're watching for them. Hank came in from the living room, took 3 steps toward her, and stopped. Tail still. He looked at her for a moment with those amber eyes, then turned and walked back out. Clara watched him go. "Not a fan." "Cautious with new people," I said. She set the muffins on a plate and leaned against the counter. "How are you sleeping? Noah mentioned you've seemed tired." "I sleep fine." "He worries." She tilted her head. "It's hard. Living alone at this stage. After losing Susan. Have you thought about seeing someone just to check up?" "I see my doctor twice a year." "Of course." A small smile. "Noah mentioned you've been mixing up appointments lately. My grandmother had early memory issues around your age. Worth catching early." She reached into her bag and set a business card on the counter. "There's a doctor I've heard wonderful things about. Dr. Harmon. Just in case." After she left, I picked up the card. Dr. Elliot Harmon. Geriatric psychiatry. I turned it over once, set it down, and called my doctor's office to confirm my February appointment had actually happened. The receptionist confirmed it. Routine checkup. No concerns noted. Then I looked up Elliot Harmon online. His listed specialties stopped me on the 3rd line. Cognitive assessment. Dementia evaluation. Capacity determination. That last one. The legal evaluation of whether a person is mentally competent to manage their own finances and medical care. I sat with that for a long time, The cameras arrived Wednesday afternoon. 3 wireless units, motion activated, 96-hour battery life. I'd ordered them Monday night after Clara left. 30 years in a classroom had given me a precise understanding of sightlines. I knew how a room looked from every angle. I installed the first camera inside the hollow base of the ceramic rooster Susan had kept on top of the refrigerator since 1994. The second went behind the history books on the middle office shelf, lens clearing the spine of a 1962 edition of Bruce Catton. The third in the living room, tucked behind the corner clock. I named the storage folders the way I named everything. Primary source evidence, labeled, dated, backed up to an external drive in my locked desk drawer. The first night I watched the feeds until midnight. Nothing moved. Thursday morning at 6:47, the kitchen camera activated. I was upstairs when my phone buzzed. I opened the app and watched the live feed. Clara had come in through the back door with a key. Noah's spare, the one he kept on the hook by the back entrance. She stood in the center of the kitchen in the gray morning light, not moving, just looking around the room the way you look at a place when you think no one is watching. Then she walked to the cabinet where I kept my medications. She opened it slowly, pulled out each bottle one at a time, read the labels, checked the dosages, photographed each one with her phone before replacing it exactly as it had been. She opened the drawer beneath and went through that as well. 4 minutes and 20 seconds, start to finish, methodical, unhurried. Then she left the way she'd come. I lay in the dark watching the empty kitchen on the feed. She wasn't checking on me. She was taking inventory. I called Patricia that afternoon and told her what I'd seen. "That's the access phase," Patricia said. "She's mapping everything, medications, dosages, what you take and when. She'll use that information to know what to add and how much before anyone notices a change in you. How long before she moves to the next phase?" With my father, it was about 2 weeks after she had full access to the house. A pause. "Mr. Greer, do you have anyone who can help you? Someone you trust completely?" I looked at the wall. 6 names. 6 lines. "I'm working on it," I said. That evening I contacted the FBI field office in Savannah. I'd looked up the number for their financial crimes division and left a message explaining the situation in plain terms. Name, address, what I had, what I suspected. I kept it factual. A retired history teacher with camera footage, a box of documents from Boston, and a pattern that crossed 4 states. I didn't expect to hear back quickly. Federal agencies move at their own pace. But 2 days later, a woman named Torres called me from a number with a Richmond area code. She asked me to repeat everything I'd told the voicemail. I did. She asked if I had documentation. I told her I had footage, financial records, and the testimony of at least 3 families. A silence on her end. Then, "Mr. Greer, don't confront her. Don't change your behavior in any way. Can you do that? I taught high school for 30 years, I said. I know how to keep a straight face." "Good," Torres said. "Because if she suspects you're onto her, she'll disappear, and your son will never understand what almost happened to him." After I hung up, I went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the window looking out at the peach trees in the late afternoon light. Hank sat beside me and leaned against my leg. "We're not alone anymore, buddy," I said. He wagged once, slowly, and looked out the window with me. Friday morning at 6:52. The kitchen camera activated again. I was already awake. Had been since 5. I'd started sleeping lighter, the way you do when part of your brain is always listening. I opened the app and watched. Clara came in through the back door the same way she had Thursday. Same key, same unhurried movement. She set her bag on the counter and stood for a moment looking toward the hallway, making sure the house was quiet. Then she reached into her bag and took out a small amber pill bottle. I sat up straighter in bed. She set the bottle on the counter and opened it. Tapped 3 small white tablets into her palm. Then she picked up the back of a spoon and began pressing down on them, one at a time, grinding them into a fine white powder against the granite. Slow, careful, thorough. When she was done, she scraped the powder into the coffee carafe I kept on the counter, the programmable one that ran every morning at 6:30. She used the spoon to stir it in. Then she rinsed the spoon under the tap, dried it on a dish towel, replaced it exactly where it had been, and put the pill bottle back in her bag. She looked around the kitchen one more time, nodded to herself, the small private nod of a person who has done a thing correctly. Then she left. The whole thing had taken 6 minutes. I sat in bed with my phone in my hand and my heart going at a pace I hadn't felt since the year I turned 50 and thought I was having a cardiac event during a faculty meeting. I breathed through it, in and out, slow. Then I got up, went downstairs, and poured the entire carafe down the kitchen sink, ran hot water after it, rinsed the carafe twice, stood at the sink for a moment looking out at the peach trees in the early morning light. Hank came in from the living room and went straight to the coffee maker. He sniffed at the base of it, then looked up at me. "Don't," I said. He turned away. But the floor around the base of the machine was wet where coffee had dripped when I'd pulled the carafe. A small puddle, maybe 2 inches across, on the tile where Hank now stood. I moved toward him. Too slow. He lapped at it twice before I got my hand under his muzzle and lifted his head away. 2 small laps. Maybe a teaspoon of liquid. I stood there holding his head in both hands, looking at his face. "How much did you get?" I said. He looked back at me with those steady eyes, tail moving slowly. I grabbed his leash off the hook by the door. The drive to the veterinary clinic on Abercorn Street took 11 minutes. I made it in 8. Doctor. Sarah Okafor met me at the front desk when I came through the door carrying Hank. I told her he'd ingested an unknown substance, possibly medication dissolved in liquid, maybe a teaspoon, maybe less, 10 minutes ago. She took him from me immediately. I sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes. There was a woman across from me with a cat carrier in her lap and a teenager beside her on his phone. The television on the wall was showing a morning news program with the sound off. I watched the closed captions scroll past without reading them. Doctor. Okafor came out and sat in the chair beside me. "He's stable," she said. "We induced vomiting and he's responding well, but his blood work shows benzodiazepine compounds, a significant concentration for his body weight." "How significant?" "Enough to have caused serious harm if he'd ingested more, or if he were smaller, or older." She looked at me carefully. "Mr. Greer, this wasn't accidental exposure. The concentration is too precise. Can you tell me more about the substance?" I told her what I'd seen on the camera feed. All of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I'll need to file a report. This constitutes deliberate poisoning of an animal under Georgia law." "I know," I said. "File it. I want everything documented." She gave me a written report before I left, signed and dated, with the compound identified, the concentration noted, and her professional conclusion stated plainly intentional administration. I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket next to the copy of the camera footage I'd transferred to a USB drive that morning before leaving the house. I called Patricia from the parking lot. "She put something in my coffee," I said. "My dog got into the residue." A pause. "Is the dog okay?" "He'll be fine." "Good." Her voice was steady. "That's how it started with my father. First, the dog didn't like her. Then the dog got sick. Then my father started forgetting things that hadn't happened yet." Another pause. "She's moving into the medication phase, Mr. Greer. Small doses at first. Enough to cause confusion and fatigue. Not enough for anyone to notice unless they're looking." I looked through the clinic window at the desk where Dr. Okafor was writing her report. "I'm looking," I said. That evening, I sent Torres the footage file and the vet's report with a single line of text. She started, "Benzodiazepine in my coffee this morning. Dog intercepted it. Full documentation attached." Torres replied 20 minutes later. "Received. Keep the footage coming. Do not confront her. We're building something that will hold." I went back inside and sat with Hank on the kitchen floor until he fell asleep with his head in my lap. His breathing was slow and even. Outside the window, the peach trees were dark shapes against the evening sky. First, the dog got sick. Then the forgetting starts. Not this time. Noah came for dinner Sunday. He brought a bottle of Cabernet and a container of Susan's Brunswick stew recipe, which he'd been attempting to replicate for 2 years with mixed results. This batch was close. I didn't tell him that. I told him it needed more time on the stove, which made him argue with me for 10 minutes, which was the point. Clara didn't come. Noah said she had a prior commitment with her family. I nodded and opened the wine. We ate at the kitchen table, the two of us, the way we had most Sundays since Susan died. It was a good evening. Noah talked about a photography project he was working on, a series of long exposure shots of the Georgia coast at night. He was excited about it the way he got excited about things that mattered to him, hands moving, talking fast. I listened and asked questions and thought, not for the first time, that Susan would have loved this version of him. After dinner, he helped me clean up, and then stood at the kitchen counter with his wine glass, looking at me the way he did when he had something on his mind and hadn't decided whether to say it. "Clara mentioned you forgot about a phone call you two had last week," he said finally. "Something about the farm insurance." I kept my hands in the dishwater. "I don't remember that conversation." "She said you talked for 20 minutes. "Noah, I didn't forget it. It didn't happen." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad, she's not the type to make something up." "I know you believe that." He set his glass down. "Is everything okay? I mean, really okay? Because she's mentioned a couple of things and I just want to make sure." "I'm fine," I said. "I promise you, I'm fine." He left at 9. I stood on the porch and watched his taillights disappear down the gravel drive and thought about how a woman could plant a seed in 6 words. "She mentioned you forgot." That was all it took. "One sentence," said gently, with concern in her voice. And now my son was standing in my kitchen asking if I was really okay. She was good at this. The second FedEx box from Patricia arrived Monday. This one was smaller, but heavier than the first. Inside was a handwritten note on top. More came in over the weekend. Rebecca Ayers sent what she had from Memphis. David Keller's son in Charlotte contributed 3 folders. I've organized everything by victim. I think you should see the full picture. I spread it across the kitchen table. 4 victims, full files on each. Harold Finch, Charleston. 7.4 million. 14 months. Currently in memory care in Mount Pleasant. Does not consistently recognize his daughter. Eugene Marsh, Atlanta. 4.1 million. 11 months. Died 2020 from cardiac arrest. 8 weeks after signing over power of attorney. Medical examiner ruled natural causes. David Keller, Charlotte. 3.8 million. 13 months. Currently living with his son. Moderate cognitive impairment. Cause disputed by family. Robert Ayers, Memphis. 2.9 million. 9 months. Died 2021 from cardiac arrest. Medical examiner ruled natural causes. 2 dead. 2 survivors in various states of diminishment. $18.2 million total. Moved through a series of shell entities that had since been dissolved. I sat with that number for a long time. 18.2 million. 4 men, 4 families, decades of work and saving and building, gone in under 14 months each. I thought about what Patricia had told me in our first call. She's very good at what she does. I thought about Eugene Marsh dying 8 weeks after signing over power of attorney. I thought about Robert. Don't let her in. I was looking at the files when I heard Noah's truck in the driveway. He wasn't expected. I closed the folders and stacked them and put Patricia's note in my shirt pocket before he reached the door. He came in carrying a bunch of flowers, yellow and white, the kind Clara liked. He set them on the counter and looked at me with that expression again. The careful one. Clara wanted me to bring those, he said. She felt bad about the conversation last night. She said she didn't mean to worry you. I looked at the flowers on my counter. Yellow and white. Bright and cheerful and completely out of place. That's kind of her, I said. Noah nodded. He looked relieved. He believed in her generosity the way you believe in something you need to be true. I watched him stand in my kitchen holding his wine glass the week before, talking about the coast at night, alive and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. And I thought about Eugene Marsh. 8 weeks. I thought about what I was going to have to do before this was over, and what it was going to cost. Stay for coffee, I said. He stayed for an hour. We talked about the photography project again. I asked more questions than I had the night before. When he left, I stood on the porch until his lights were gone, then went inside and put the flowers in a vase because throwing them away would have meant something, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Then I sat down and opened the files again. $18.2 million. 4 men. 2 of them dead. She wasn't going to make it 5. Tuesday morning, I put on my white dress shirt and a tie. The blue one Susan had given me the Christmas before she died. I hadn't worn it since her funeral. But that morning, I stood at the closet and reached for it deliberately. The way you put on a uniform before something that matters. If Clara and Dr. Harmon wanted to see a man in decline, they were going to see a man who dressed like he still had something worth protecting. Noah arrived at 9:30. Clara came with him. She was wearing a pale green dress and carrying a leather portfolio I hadn't seen before. She greeted me warmly at the door, both hands on my arm, asking how I'd slept. I told her well. She said she was glad. Her eyes moved past me into the house, quickly, the way they always did, cataloging. Doctor Harmon arrived at 10. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, a leather bag over one shoulder. He had the careful, unhurried manner of a man who made people feel safe by design. His handshake was firm. His voice was measured. He said he was glad I'd agreed to this, that it was just a conversation, nothing to be concerned about. I said I understood. We sat in the living room. Noah on the couch beside Clara. Doctor. Harmon in the armchair across from me, a legal pad on his knee. He started with simple questions. Date. Day of the week. Current president. I answered each one without hesitation. He noted something on his pad. He asked me to remember 3 words he would return to later. Apple, honesty, sunset. I repeated them back. He asked about my sleep, my appetite, my daily routine. I answered accurately, keeping my voice slightly slower than normal, pausing once or twice before answering. Just enough to be noticed. Then he asked what I'd had for breakfast. Eggs. I said. Toast. And yesterday, what did you do? Stayed around the farm mostly. Noah stopped by in the afternoon. I glanced at Noah. Or was that the day before? I lose track sometimes. Clara's expression shifted into soft concern. She reached over and touched Noah's arm. Doctor. Harmon made a note. He continued for another 20 minutes, circling back to the 3 words at the end. I got 2 of them right. I hesitated on the 3rd, said sunset, then corrected myself to honesty, then shook my head. I'm sorry, I said. The days have been blurring together. Doctor. Harmon set his pad down and looked at Noah and Clara. Your father is showing early indicators of cognitive stress, he said. Not dementia, not yet, but patterns that warrant attention. Memory gaps, timeline confusion, difficulty with sequential recall. Given his age and recent loss, this is not unexpected, but I'd recommend we take some proactive steps. Noah's jaw tightened. What kind of steps? Clara opened her leather portfolio. I took the liberty of having some documents prepared, she said. Just as a precaution, an updated will and a medical power of attorney. Standard protections for someone in Walt's situation. She spread the pages on the coffee table. Her voice was gentle, careful. I hope you don't mind, Walt. We just want to make sure you're protected. I looked at the documents. The will left 70% of the farm to Noah and 30% to Clara. The medical power of attorney granted Clara full authority over my healthcare decisions, including, in a subordinate clause on the 3rd page, authorization to consent to or refuse life-sustaining treatment on my behalf. I read that clause twice. Noah picked up the pen. I looked at my son, 28 years old. Susan's eyes, Susan's jaw. He was doing this because he loved me, because a man he trusted had just told him his father was slipping, because a woman he loved had laid documents on a table and called them protections. He didn't know. He couldn't know. I thought about the morning Noah was 8 years old, sitting at this same kitchen table, practicing his signature for the first time on a sheet of paper Susan had given him. She'd kept that paper. I'd found it in her jewelry box after she died. N. Greer. Over and over. Getting more confident with each line. Noah signed. 3 strokes. Fast and certain. Doctor. Harmon produced a notary stamp from his bag and pressed it onto each page. The sound it made was solid and final, like a door closing in another room. Clara gathered the documents and slid them back into the portfolio. She looked at me with warm, steady eyes and said, "Thank you for letting us take care of you, Walt." After they left, I sat in the empty living room for a long time. Then I took out my phone and photographed every page of every document Clara had left copies of on the table. 23 photographs, each one clear and complete. I sent them to Torres with a message. She executed the documents today. Full POA, including end-of-life authority. Noah signed, Dr. Harmon notarized. Neither credential has been independently verified. Torres replied within the hour. Received. We're verifying Harmon now. Do not take any medication he may have prescribed. Stay the course. I looked at the notary stamp impression on the copy of the power of attorney in my hand. She had just given herself the legal authority to end my life, and my son had handed her the pen. Torres called Thursday morning at 8:40. Not a text this time. A call. I was at the kitchen table with coffee and the wall map when my phone rang and her name came up on the screen. "Doctor, Harmon doesn't exist," she said. I set my coffee down. The medical license number on his card belongs to a retired pediatrician in Valdosta, who's been deceased since 2019. The notary stamp on your documents is registered to a business in Chatham County that dissolved in 2021. A pause. The documents your son signed are fraudulent. They have no legal standing. I let that settle for a moment. The relief of it, and the anger underneath the relief. "What about Clara?" I said. "We've confirmed 3 of the 4 aliases: Claire Whitfield, Carol Whitmore, Christine Walsh. There are likely others we haven't found yet. The financial trail across the 4 victims you identified is substantial. Wire transfers, dissolved LLCs, offshore routing. My forensic accountant has been working it since Monday." Another pause. "Mr. Greer, I want to be direct with you. What we have is strong circumstantially. But to prosecute, we need her in the act. We need documented evidence of intent to harm, not just intent to defraud. The camera footage of her putting medication in my coffee is excellent, but a defense attorney will argue contamination, misidentification, alternative explanation. We need more. We need the full sequence. Ideally, we need her attempting the final step with federal witnesses present. You want to let her keep going? I want to catch her in a way that puts her away permanently." Torres's voice was even. "Can you hold on a little longer?" I looked at the wall. 6 names. 6 lines. "How much longer?" I said. "We think she'll escalate within the next 10 days. The POA is signed. The documents are in place. From her perspective, the groundwork is done. She'll move to the final phase soon." A pause. "We'll be ready when she does. I need you to be ready too." After we hung up, I went to the office and stood at the wall for a long time. 10 days. Maybe less. Clara came every day that week. Monday, she brought soup. Tuesday, she stayed for 2 hours asking about the farm's operating accounts. Whether I had a financial advisor, whether Noah had access to the primary checking account. I answered vaguely, playing the part Torres had asked me to play. Confused on the details, certain on the broad strokes. She took notes on her phone. Wednesday, she came while Noah was there. She sat beside him on the couch, and twice, gently, in the middle of ordinary conversation, mentioned things I had supposedly said or done that I had no memory of. Noah watched me each time, that careful look. I shook my head slowly, said I didn't recall, let the doubt land on his face without fighting it. It was the hardest thing I'd done in years. Harder than the camera footage. Harder than the vet's report. Sitting across from my son and letting him believe, even partially, even for a few weeks, that his father was losing his mind. But Torres had been clear. If Clara suspected I was onto her, she would disappear, and Noah would spend the rest of his life not knowing what had almost happened to him. So I played the part. Thursday, I discovered she had contacted my bank. I found out by accident. My banker, a man named Gerald I'd worked with for 15 years, called to say someone identifying herself as my daughter-in-law had inquired about the process for adding a family member to a primary account for elder care purposes. Gerald had told her he'd need authorization from me in writing before any account changes could be made. He was calling to let me know, just in case. I thanked him. After we hung up, I called Torres. She's moved to the financial access phase. Torres said, "This is consistent with the pattern from the other victims. She's preparing to transfer assets before or immediately after the health event." A pause. "Mr. Greer, we think the timeline has compressed. Our analysts believe she'll make her move within 72 hours. 72 hours. I looked at Hank under the table. He was watching me the way he always did when I was on the phone, attentive and still, as if he understood that the tone of a conversation mattered even when the words didn't. "Then let's be ready," I said. Torres walked me through the setup. 2 unmarked vehicles, 1 block north, 1 block south, 4 agents in plain clothes, 2 of whom would be inside the house before Clara arrived. A wire fitted that morning, small enough to be invisible under a flannel shirt. The signal phrase, when I was ready to trigger the arrest. She asked me to repeat it back. I said it once, slowly. Torres said, "That's the one. Use it and we move in 45 seconds. After we hung up, I went to the office and sat at my desk and thought about Susan. About the way she used to stand at the kitchen window on autumn mornings with her coffee, looking out at the peach trees, not saying anything, just looking. She did that when she was thinking through something difficult. I never asked what. I figured if she wanted to tell me, she would. I wished I'd asked. I wished I'd asked about a lot of things. 3 days, maybe less. And then it would be over, one way or another. I pulled out a legal pad and wrote Noah's name at the top of a blank page. Then I sat for a while and thought about what a man says to his son when he isn't sure he'll get another chance to say it. Then I started writing. I finished the letter to Noah at midnight. 4 pages, longhand, on the yellow legal pad. I covered everything: the envelope, Patricia, the camera footage, Robert, Susan's journal, Dr. Harmon, the documents Noah had signed and why they were worthless, what Torres had told me and what was coming. I told him none of this was his fault. I told him that loving someone who turns out to be a predator doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. I told him his mother would be proud of the man he'd become, regardless of how any of this ended. Then I folded the pages, put them in a plain envelope, wrote his name on the front, and locked it in the safe in the office closet. I went to bed at 12:30 and was asleep by 1, which surprised me. I'd expected to lie awake. But there's a particular kind of calm that comes when you've done everything you can do and the rest is out of your hands. Susan used to call it the peace of preparation. She said her father had taught her that. Do the work, then let go of what you can't control. I slept until 5:40. Then the kitchen camera activated. The timestamp read 5:43. I opened the app and watched. Clara came in through the back door in dark clothes, moving quietly, a small bag over her shoulder. She didn't turn on the kitchen light. She stood in the gray pre-dawn dark for a moment, looking toward the hallway stairs, listening for movement from above. Then she crossed to the living room. She sat down on the floor in front of the tall mirror beside the bookshelf, the one Susan had found at an estate sale in Thomasville, and refinished herself over a long weekend. Clara set her bag beside her and opened it. She took out a small palette of makeup and a set of fine brushes and a compact mirror she held up to check the ambient light. Then she began. She worked on her left forearm first, building a bruise with purple and ochre, blending the edges carefully with her fingertip, pressing her thumb into the soft skin above the wrist to create the oval impressions of a grip. She checked it in the mirror, adjusted the yellow at the edges, added depth in the center. The bruise looked 3 days old, settling in, the color shifting from dark at the core to green-yellow at the margins. She moved to her right wrist, a bracelet of red marks, thin and linear, the kind left by something pulled tight. She drew them freehand with a brush, then smudged them slightly with her thumb to remove the precision. She worked without hurrying, without hesitation, the way someone works when they have done a thing many times before. When the marks were done, she sat back and looked at herself in the mirror. Then she began to practice. Her face changed. The composure dropped away, and something else came up beneath it. A look I'd never seen from her directly. Wide-eyed and frightened. Lower lip unsteady. The particular expression of a woman who has been hurt and is trying not to show it. She tried it several ways. Held it. Let it break. Started again. She whispered something at her reflection, too quiet for the camera's microphone, but I could read enough of it. He grabbed me. He didn't know what he was doing. She said it 3 or 4 times, adjusting the delivery each time, tilting her chin, changing where her eyes went, the way an actor runs a line. Then she took out her phone and made a call. Her voice came through the camera's audio faintly, but clearly enough. She said the timeline was still on track. She said the groundwork was done and the documents were signed. She said she needed everything ready by tomorrow morning, early, before the sun had a chance to come by and complicate things. She mentioned a name I didn't recognize. She mentioned a quantity, 4 milligrams. She said it should present as cardiac within 45 to 60 minutes of ingestion, and that given his age and recent health history, no one would look twice. She ended the call. She sat for another moment in front of the mirror, looking at her own reflection. The frightened expression was gone. What was left was something quieter and much colder, a face I recognized now as her real one, the face that lived underneath all the warmth and concern and carefully timed smiles. Then she packed her bag, stood up, and walked to the kitchen camera, the visible one I'd installed in the ceramic rooster. She looked directly at it for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and took out a small aerosol can and sprayed the lens. The feed from that camera went white. She'd found it. I sat up in bed, heart going. Then my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. 3 words. Check the clock. I opened the secondary app, the backup feed. The camera I'd hidden 6 weeks ago inside the base of the old mantel clock in the living room. The one Torres had suggested as a contingency, and that I'd never told anyone else about. Clara was still in frame, packing her bag, unhurried, satisfied. She'd disabled one camera. She didn't know about the second, Everything she'd done in the past 40 minutes was on tape. I sent the footage to Torres immediately with one line. "She's moving tomorrow. Everything is documented. We're ready." Torres replied in under a minute. "So are we." I didn't go back to sleep after Torres's message. I lay in the dark for a while, looking at the ceiling, listening to the house. Hank had come upstairs at some point during the night and was at the foot of the bed, his weight familiar against my feet. Outside, the first birds were starting. A mockingbird somewhere in the peach trees, running through its repertoire, indifferent to everything happening beneath it. 4 milligrams. Cardiac within 45 to 60 minutes. I got up at 6 and went downstairs. The kitchen looked exactly as it always did. Morning light through the window over the sink. Susan's lavender sachets, nearly colorless now. The ceramic rooster on top of the refrigerator with its lens sprayed opaque. Dead. The mantel clock in the living room still running. Its hidden camera still recording. Green light blinking once every 30 seconds behind the face. I made coffee and sat at the table and called Torres at 6:15. She answered on the first ring. I could hear voices in the background. The low, purposeful sound of people preparing. "How are you doing?" she said. "Fine," I said. "Tell me the setup again." She walked me through it. 2 vehicles, one north, one south, both within 1 block. 4 agents. Officer Daniels would arrive at my back door at 6:45 to fit the wire. The signal phrase would trigger immediate entry. 45 seconds from phrase to door. She asked if I had any questions. "1," I said. "After you have her, how long before Noah can know everything?" A pause. "We'll want a statement from you first. Couple of hours. After that, you can tell him whatever you need to." I thanked her and hung up. I took Susan's journal from the shelf where I'd put it after the attic and sat with it at the table. I didn't open it. I just held it. The dark green cover worn soft at the corners, the rubber band still around it. 35 years of mornings at this table with this woman. Coffee and conversation, and the particular comfort of being known completely by another person. She had seen Clara coming. She had been 1 day away from stopping all of this before it started. I set the journal down and looked out the window at the peach trees. There was something I hadn't let myself think about directly in the weeks since I'd read the journal. I'd circled it on the wall map and left it there, labeled but unexamined. Susan's accident. A wet road. A curve. No other vehicles. A route she'd driven 100 times. I thought about it now. I didn't know. I might never know. The investigation Torres's team had quietly reopened had found nothing conclusive. She'd told me in a brief message 2 weeks back. The original report had been thorough. There was no evidence of tampering. It might have been exactly what it appeared to be. A wet road. A curve. These things happen to careful people too. But Clara had been in Savannah in March of 2022. Susan had seen her twice. Had felt something wrong. Had been 1 day from telling me. I decided, sitting at that table on the last morning before everything changed, that I was going to live with not knowing. That I was going to finish what Susan had started and let the rest of it be. Because the alternative, spending whatever years I had left turning that question over and over without an answer, would hollow me out in a way Clara had never managed to. Susan would have told me the same thing. Do the work. Let go of what you can't control. Officer Daniels arrived at the back door at 6:42. 3 minutes early. Young woman, maybe 30. Plain clothes. calm in the way that comes from training rather than temperament. She taped the wire to my chest under my left arm, ran the transmitter lead to a small box clipped inside my waistband, had me button my flannel shirt over it and move around the kitchen to check for noise. "Say something normal," she said. "I've been a history teacher for 30 years, and I make a decent pot of coffee," I said. She listened through her earpiece and nodded. "Perfect. We've got you clear." She looked at me steadily. "Mr. Greer, you don't have to do anything except be yourself. Talk to her the way you've been talking to her. When you're ready, use the phrase, 'We'll handle everything after that.'" "I know," I said. "You've done well," she said. "Everything you've built over the past 3 weeks, the footage, the documentation, the patience, you gave us something solid to work with." After she left, I stood in the kitchen alone. Hank came and sat beside my leg and leaned against me. I reached down and put my hand on his back. The peach trees outside the window were fully in bloom, the way they'd been the afternoon I'd found the envelope on the porch step. White blossoms in the morning light. Susan had planted those trees the second spring after we bought the farm. She'd said she wanted something that came back every year without being asked. I looked at the clock. 7:10. Clara would be here in 20 minutes, maybe less. I poured the coffee down the sink, rinsed the carafe, and set it back in its place. Then I sat down at the table to wait. At 7:18, headlights swept across the kitchen window. I was at the table with an empty coffee cup and the morning paper open in front of me, which I hadn't read a word of. Hank was under the table, his chin on my foot. I heard the car pull into the gravel, the engine cut, the door open and close. Footsteps on the porch. A key in the back door lock. The same key. Noah's spare. I turned a page of the newspaper. Clara came in carrying a canvas bag and a stainless steel thermos. She was dressed simply, dark jeans and a light jacket, hair pulled back. She looked like a woman stopping by to check on a family member on her way to somewhere else. Nothing in her manner suggested that the previous night had happened. Nothing suggested that she had sat on my living room floor in the dark and practiced the face of a woman who had been grabbed. "Good morning. Walt," she said. "You're up early." "Always am," I said. She set the thermos on the counter and began unpacking the canvas bag. A container of what looked like oatmeal, a small jar of honey. She moved through the kitchen with that familiar ease, opening the right drawer for a spoon without looking. "How did you sleep?" "Well enough," I said. She filled a bowl with oatmeal and set it on the counter, then turned to the thermos. "I made your coffee," she said. "The dark roast you like. I know you've been having trouble with the machine." I hadn't mentioned any trouble with the machine. "That's thoughtful," I said. She unscrewed the thermos cap and poured coffee into my mug. The blue one Noah had given me 3 Christmases ago. The one with the farm's coordinates printed on the side in small white text. She stirred it once with a spoon, which wasn't necessary, and set it on the table in front of me. I looked at the mug, dark coffee, steaming. The color right, the smell right. Almost. Underneath the roast, there was something faint. Bitter in a way that good dark roast wasn't quite bitter. I'd smelled it once before, the morning Hank had gotten sick. The residue in the carafe after I'd poured it out. Clara pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. She folded her hands on the table and looked at me with that warm, steady expression. Waiting. "You know," I said, "I've been thinking about Susan's coffee." Clara tilted her head slightly. Oh. She had a way with it. Added a pinch of cinnamon to the grounds. Said her mother taught her that. I looked at the mug. Never tasted quite the same after she was gone. I kept trying to replicate it. I lifted the mug and held it without drinking. This doesn't taste like Susan used to make it. Clara's expression didn't change, but her hands, folded on the table, went still. 2 seconds of stillness. The same stillness I'd seen in a blurry newspaper photograph. The same stillness I'd seen across a candlelit room at a rehearsal dinner. The true face, showing for just a moment through the practiced one. Then she smiled. I can add cinnamon next time. That's all right, I said. I set the mug down. I think I'll skip the coffee this morning. Something shifted in her eyes. Outside, on the quiet residential street 1 block north, a car engine started. Clara heard it. Her gaze moved to the window, quick, then back to me. Walt. Her voice dropped its warmth, not all at once, like a lamp being turned down on a dimmer. Drink the coffee? I don't think I will, I said. She stood up from the chair. Walter. The full name now. The way my mother used it. Drink it. I looked at her across the table. At the face I'd first seen in a blurry photograph from a newspaper 6 years old. At the eyes that went still when the mask slipped. Clara, I said quietly, or whatever your name is today. We both know what's in that cup. The back door opened first, then the front. 4 agents in plain clothes, moving fast and quiet, filling the kitchen doorway before Clara had taken 2 steps. Torres came through the front with her badge out, her voice flat and professional. Federal agents, don't move. Hands where I can see them. Clara turned. She looked at the agents. She looked at me. She looked at the mug on the table between us. For 1 moment, just one. The composure dropped completely. What was underneath was not fear. It was fury, cold and total. The expression of someone who has never genuinely lost before and doesn't yet understand that this time is different. Then the agents reached her, and it was over. I sat at the table while they worked. Hank came out from underneath and put his head in my lap, and I rested my hand on him without thinking about it. Torres bagged the coffee mug, labeled it, handed it to an agent. She looked at me across the kitchen. You did good, Mr. Greer, she said. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice quite yet. Outside, I heard another car pull into the drive. A door. Fast footsteps on the gravel. Then Noah's voice from the porch, sharp with alarm. Dad, what's going on? What happened? I took a breath, looked at Hank, stood up from the table. Come inside, son, I said. Sit down. There are some things I need to show you. Noah sat at the kitchen table where Clara had been sitting 20 minutes earlier. The agents were still working in the living room. I could hear them, measured and methodical, the sounds of a scene being processed. Torres had told me to take my time with Noah, that they'd need my statement, but it could wait an hour. She said it with the particular consideration of someone who understood that what I was about to do was going to be harder than anything that had come before it. I made a fresh pot of coffee, real coffee, and set a cup in front of Noah. He hadn't said much since he'd come through the door and found his kitchen full of federal agents and Clara in handcuffs. He'd stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it in, and then he'd sat down when I asked him to, and he'd been quiet since. I sat across from him and opened my laptop. I need to show you some things, I said. I'm going to ask you to watch and not say anything until I tell you I'm done. Can you do that? He looked at me. His face was very still. Okay, he said. I started with the camera footage from the first morning. Clara coming in through the back door with Noah's key, standing in the kitchen alone, opening the medication cabinet, pulling out each bottle, photographing them. I watched Noah watch the screen. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Then the footage from the coffee carafe. Clara with the pill bottle, the spoon, the powder dissolving into the dark liquid, the careful wipe of the counter, the self-satisfied nod before she left. Noah looked away from the screen for a moment, looked at the counter where the carafe sat, then back at the screen. I showed him the vet's report. Dr. Okafor's written conclusion. Intentional administration of benzodiazepine compounds. I showed him Patricia's files. Harold Finch, Eugene Marsh, David Keller. He read through them slowly, page by page, not rushing. He stopped at the list of aliases. Claire Whitfield, Carol Whitmore, Christine Walsh. He looked at each name for a long time. Then I showed him the wedding announcement photograph from Memphis. Clara at the reception with Eugene Marsh. And behind her, at the edge of the frame, Robert Ayres. Noah looked up at me. That's your cousin Robert. Yes, I said. He died. In 2021, cardiac arrest. I let that sit for a moment. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes. Noah set the photograph down slowly. He picked up his coffee cup and held it without drinking, the way I'd held the mug Clara had brought that morning. Then he set it back down. I opened the journal to the page I'd marked with a folded piece of paper, placed it on the table between us. This is your mother's, I said. From March of 2022, he looked at me before he looked at the page. I nodded. He read the entry about the gallery opening, the woman who had approached Susan with questions about the family. He read Susan's description. Something deeply wrong with that woman's eyes. He read the entry from March 14th. I need to tell Walt about her. Tomorrow. He closed the journal carefully and set it on the table. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. In the living room, an agent said something in a low voice and another responded. Outside, a car door closed. Then Noah's shoulders dropped in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. The way a person drops when something they've been holding becomes too heavy. He didn't make a sound. Just that slow release, like air going out. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. We sat like that for a while. Then he straightened up and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. One quick motion, and looked at me with Susan's eyes in a face that was older than it had been an hour ago. Did you think, he said, his voice careful and quiet, that she had anything to do with Mom's accident? I had known he would ask. I'd been thinking about how to answer it since the night I'd found the journal. I don't know, I said. Honestly, I don't know. Torres has people looking at it. There was nothing conclusive. It may have been exactly what the report said. He nodded slowly. But it might not have been. It might not have been. He sat with that. I let him. After a while, he said, I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner. You loved her, I said. That's not something to apologize for. She was very good at what she did, and you loved her with an open heart. That's not a failing. That's just being human. He looked at his hands on the table. I signed those documents, he said. Torres confirmed they were worthless. Fraudulent notary, fraudulent physician. Nothing you signed had any legal standing. He nodded, but I could see it would take more than that to clear the weight of it. Some things you carry for a while regardless of what the facts say. "Dad," he said finally. "How long did you know?" "From the night of the rehearsal dinner," I said. I wasn't certain, but I knew something was wrong. He looked at me for a long moment. "You carried that alone for 3 weeks. You would have tried to protect her," I said. "And I couldn't risk her disappearing before Torres had enough to hold her permanently." I paused. "I'm sorry I had to lie to you." He shook his head. Slowly. Once. "You didn't lie to me," he said. "You protected me. There's a difference." He stood up and came around the table and put his arms around me the way he hadn't since he was maybe 12 years old. Before boys that age decide such things are no longer appropriate. I held on. Outside the kitchen window, the peach trees were white in the morning light. The trial began on a Tuesday in September. Savannah in September runs warm and slow, the summer heat breaking only in the evenings. The old live oaks along the squares still thick with moss. The federal courthouse on Montgomery Street was a low brick building that looked more like a library than a place where serious things got decided. I'd driven past it 100 times over the years without giving it much thought. I gave it thought now. Noah and I arrived together. Patricia Finch Moreau was waiting on the front steps, a small woman in a gray suit, her dark hair cut short since the last time we'd spoken on the phone. We'd met in person twice in the month since the arrest. Once when she'd come to Savannah to give her statement, and once when Noah and I had driven to meet her in Charleston, where she'd shown us what remained of her father's life. A small room in a memory care facility. A man who sometimes knew his daughter and sometimes didn't. She shook my hand, and then Noah's. She didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. Inside. The courtroom was fuller than I'd expected. Victim families took up 2 rows on the left side. I recognized Rebecca Ayers near the end of the second row, Robert's daughter, who'd driven up from Memphis. She nodded at me when I sat down. I nodded back. Clara sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, her hair down, no jewelry. She looked composed and unremarkable, the way she always looked when she was performing a version of herself for an audience. She didn't look at me. The prosecution laid out the case over 2 days. Torres's team had built it carefully. The camera footage came first. Played on a screen the jury could see clearly, time-stamped and annotated. Clara entering through the back door. Clara at the medication cabinet. Clara grinding pills into coffee. The audio recording from the night before the arrest. Her voice in the dark living room. 4 milligrams. Cardiac within 45 to 60 minutes. The vet's report on Hank. The fraudulent documents, doctor. Harmon's fake credentials. The worthless notary stamp. The financial records Patricia had compiled. Wire transfers through shell entities. 4 victims. $18.2 million. When the audio recording played in the courtroom, the room went quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of people being polite. The quiet of people hearing something that confirms a thing they'd hoped wasn't true. I testified on the afternoon of the first day. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline from the envelope on the porch step to the morning of the arrest. I answered each question directly and without elaboration, the way Torres had advised. When she played the footage on the screen and asked me to confirm what I was seeing, I confirmed it. When she asked how I had felt sitting at that kitchen table waiting for Clara to arrive that final morning, I said I had felt ready. That was the truest answer I had. Clara's attorney cross-examined me for 40 minutes. He was a careful man who asked careful questions and got careful answers. He had nowhere to go because the evidence had nowhere to go. Patricia testified the following morning. She spoke about her father for 11 minutes without looking at her notes. Her voice even and precise. She described the man Harold Finch had been before Clara, and what he had become after. She described the last visit she'd been able to have with him before he stopped reliably knowing who she was. She said she had spent 3 years waiting for someone to listen to her. She said she was grateful that someone finally had. Rebecca Ayres spoke briefly. She read from a prepared statement about her father Robert, the kind of man he'd been, the warning he'd left her that she hadn't understood until it was too late. She said don't let her in. She said she understood now what he had meant. She sat down. Noah took the stand last. He spoke for 7 minutes. He described meeting Clara, falling in love, believing she was the person she presented herself to be. He described watching his father at the kitchen table after the arrest, showing him the footage, showing him the journal. He said she made me doubt my father. He paused. He said that's something I'm going to have to work through for a while, but I'm going to work through it. Because my father taught me that the work is what holds you together. He didn't look at Clara while he spoke. I watched him not look at her and understood what that cost him. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Guilty on all 47 counts. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following morning. When she said the words, the room released a breath it had been holding since September. Maybe longer. Patricia put her hand briefly over mine on the armrest between our seats. I looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then at the window, where the afternoon light was coming through at a low angle. The particular gold of Savannah in the fall. Clara was let out without looking at anyone. Outside on the courthouse steps afterward, the 4 of us stood in the warm September air. Noah and Patricia and Rebecca and me. Nobody said anything for a while. It didn't seem like the kind of moment that needed words. Then Rebecca said quietly, "He would have been glad." I thought about Robert, the funny, generous man who remembered birthdays and showed up with beer when you needed help. I thought about Harold Finch in his small room in Mount Pleasant. I thought about Eugene Marsh, who hadn't made it to a courtroom. "Yes," I said. "He would have." Noah put his hand on my shoulder. We stood there in the late afternoon sun until the light shifted and it was time to go. The sentencing was the following morning. 32 years without possibility of parole. The judge read the sentence in a steady voice, without inflection. The way judges read things that are final. Clara stood at the defense table and received it the way she received everything, without visible reaction, her face composed and unreadable. I watched her face while the judge spoke. I was looking for something. I'm not sure what. Remorse, perhaps, or at least the performance of it. There was neither. When the marshal let her out, she paused at the door and looked back into the courtroom. Her eyes found mine across the room and stayed there for a moment. The same still eyes I'd seen in a newspaper photograph. The same measurement. Then the door closed. Noah and I drove home in the early afternoon. The farm looked the same as it always had. Gravel drive, peach trees, the old house at the top of the rise with its white porch and green shutters. The same as it had looked the afternoon I'd found the envelope on the porch step, 5 months ago, which felt like a different life. I went to the office and opened the safe. Inside, behind the external drive and a folder of property documents. was the envelope I'd put there the night before Clara's last visit. My name in my own handwriting. I took it out and looked at it for a moment, then walked to the kitchen where Noah was making coffee. I set the envelope on the table. He looked at it. "What's that?" "I wrote it the night before," I said. "In case things didn't go the way we planned. I want you to read it." He picked it up carefully. He sat down and opened it and read in silence. 4 pages, taking his time. I made myself busy at the counter, not watching him. When he finished, he folded the pages back into the envelope and held it in both hands. "You wrote this thinking you might not make it through the next morning," he said. It was a possibility I needed to account for. He was quiet for a moment. "You wrote about Mom, about what she'd want for me." "Yes, you wrote that I should build something." He looked at the envelope. "You said she would have wanted that." "She would have," I said. She was always more interested in what came next than in what had already happened. That was her nature. Noah set the envelope down on the table and looked out the kitchen window at the peach trees. He was quiet for a long time. The particular quiet of a person thinking through something large and letting it settle before they speak. "I want to do it, Dad," he said finally. "I want to build something for the people she hurt. A place where families can get help, legal resources, financial counseling, someone to talk to who understands what they've been through." He looked at me. "I've been thinking about it since the day you showed me the files, since I read Patricia's name on those folders and understood what her family had been through." "Tell me what you're thinking," I said. He told me. The Susan Greer Foundation opened the following March. In a 2-story brick building on Price Street in downtown Savannah that Noah had spent 4 months renovating. He'd done much of the design work himself, fitting the spaces carefully to their purpose, a reception area with comfortable chairs and good light. 3 consultation rooms for legal and financial counseling, a larger room for group sessions, a resource library along the back wall. Above the entrance, he'd mounted a small bronze plaque. Susan Ann Greer, 1961 to 2022. She saw things others missed. Patricia Finch Moreau flew down for the opening and became the Foundation's first advisory board member. Rebecca Ayers drove up from Memphis and brought 2 women she'd connected with through an elder fraud survivors network, both of whom had stories that rhymed with Harold Finch's, with Robert Ayers's, with all the others. The morning of the opening, I stood in the consultation room nearest the front and looked at the walls Noah had painted a quiet gray-green, the color Susan had always wanted for the living room at the farm and that I'd kept putting off repainting. I hadn't told Noah that. He'd picked it himself. I thought about the afternoon I'd found the envelope on the porch step, the newspaper clipping folded twice, the paper gone soft at the edges, the blurry photograph, the eyes I'd recognized across a candlelit room. I thought about what would have happened if I'd thrown the envelope away, if I'd told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, the anxious imaginings of an old man who worried too much. I thought about Susan sitting at her kitchen table on the evening of March 14th, writing I need to tell Walt about her. Tomorrow. She hadn't gotten her tomorrow, but we had gotten ours. Noah found me in the consultation room a few minutes before the opening ceremony. He stood beside me and looked at the walls. "I think she'd like it," he said. "The color," I said. He looked at me. "What about the color?" "She always wanted that color in the living room. I kept putting it off." He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere unguarded. I hadn't heard it in a long time. maybe since before any of this started. "Then we got it right," he said. We walked out together to where Patricia and Rebecca and the gathered families were waiting in the reception area, and Noah welcomed everyone in a voice that was steady and clear and his own. And I stood near the back and listened and thought that Susan would indeed have liked this very much. Not the circumstances that had made it necessary, but this. The room full of people who had found each other. The work that came after the hard thing. She would have liked this very much. The foundation's first year was quieter than Noah had expected, and more necessary than either of us had known. By summer, we had worked with 23 families across Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. Some had come to us through Torres's referral network. Some had found Noah's name in news coverage of the trial. Some had found us the way people find things they need, by searching in the dark until something solid appeared. They came with boxes of documents and hard drives, and the particular exhaustion of people who had been trying to explain something important to someone who kept not understanding. We listened. That was the first thing we offered. Lawyers came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. A financial counselor named Marcus, who had worked in fraud recovery for 15 years, came on Wednesdays. A therapist named Dr. Joellen Price held group sessions on Friday mornings in the large back room, and those sessions, which Noah had worried might be slow to fill, were full from the second week onward. Patricia flew down twice that summer, once to consult on a case that had similarities to her father's, once to speak at a community event Noah had organized on elder fraud prevention. She spoke for 20 minutes without notes, about her father, about the years she'd spent trying to be heard, about what it meant to finally have somewhere to bring the evidence she'd been carrying. The room was full and quiet in the way rooms get when something true is being said. I came in on Tuesdays mostly. Sat in on consultations when families wanted an extra person in the room, someone who understood the particular shape of what they were describing from the inside. I didn't say much during those sessions. Mostly I listened. Occasionally I said I know. Occasionally that was enough. One Tuesday in July, a man came in alone. 71 years old, retired electrician from Pooler, 20 miles west of Savannah. He sat across from me in the consultation room and set a manila folder on the table and looked at me and said, "My son thinks I'm imagining things." I opened the folder. The documents inside looked familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I spent 2 hours with him that afternoon. His name was Gerald Watts. By October, with Torres's team coordinating across 2 states, the woman who had been managing his finances for 7 months was in federal custody. Gerald sent a card to the foundation at Christmas. Noah put it on the resource library wall, where it stayed. Autumn came to the farm the way it always did, the heat breaking slowly, the peach trees going to their fall colors. Hank moving a little slower in the mornings, but still coming down the stairs when he heard me in the kitchen. He was 13 now, gray almost to his shoulders. The vet said his heart was good. His joints were managing. He was doing well for his age. I told her I knew the feeling. Noah came for dinner most Sundays. Sometimes he brought Patricia when she was in town. Sometimes he brought Marcus from the foundation or Dr. Price or one of the families they'd been working with who had reached a point in their recovery where dinner at someone's table felt possible again. The kitchen that had been too quiet for too long was louder now, more often, in the way that felt like repair rather than distraction. One Sunday in November, Noah stayed after the others had left, and we sat on the back porch in the cooling evening air. Hank was between us on the old wooden bench, his head on Noah's thigh. The peach trees were bare now, the way they got in the fall. The white blossoms long gone. The fruit long picked. just the clean branching shapes against the darkening sky. Noah said, "Do you think about her?" I knew who he meant. "Sometimes," I said. Me too." He was quiet for a moment. "Not the way I used to. It's different now. More like thinking about a thing that happened. Less like thinking about a person." "That sounds like healing," I said. He nodded slowly. "Doctor, Price says grief and betrayal are different processes, but they sometimes get tangled up. She says it can take a while to sort them out." He looked out at the trees. "I think I'm sorting." "Good," I said. We sat for a while in the comfortable silence that takes a long time to build between two people, and that I had learned not to take for granted. Then Noah said, "Dad, who do you think sent the envelope?" I'd been waiting for that question for 7 months. "I have a thought," I said. "Tell me." I looked out at the bare peach trees in the darkening evening. I thought about Susan at her kitchen table on the night of March 14th, writing, "I need to tell Walt about her. Tomorrow." I thought about a woman who had understood enough to want to warn someone, who had tried to find a way. "I think," I said slowly, "that someone who knew what Clara was doing wanted to stop it and didn't know how to do it directly. Someone who had been close enough to see the pattern but not close enough to prove it. Someone who, for whatever reason, couldn't come forward themselves." I paused. "I think whoever it was knew enough about me to know I wouldn't let it go." Noah considered this. "Do you think we'll ever find out for certain?" "No," I said. "Probably not," he nodded. "Does that bother you?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "Whoever it was did what they needed to do. So did we. That's enough." Hank shifted between us, resettling his weight, and put his chin down on Noah's knee. The sky above the bare peach trees was clear and full of stars, the particular dark of a Georgia November night when the humidity finally breaks and the sky goes deep and sharp. Susan had loved this kind of night. She'd call me out to the porch sometimes, just to look at it. "Pay attention," she used to say. That's all. Just pay attention. Winter came late that year. December arrived mild and unhurried, the way Georgia winters sometimes do. The cold never quite committing. The days shorter but still bright. The evenings cool enough for a jacket and a fire, but not cold enough to keep you inside if you didn't want to be. The peach trees stood bare against the pale December sky, their branches clean and patient, waiting for April the way they always did. I had learned something from those trees over the years. Susan had pointed it out once, early in our time at the farm, when I'd been worried about a late frost and whether the blossoms would survive it. She'd said, "Walt, those trees have been coming back every year since before either of us was born. They know what they're doing. Trust the roots. Trust the roots." I thought about that a lot in the months after the trial. The last Sunday of December, Noah came for dinner and stayed until the stars were out. We ate at the kitchen table, the two of us, the way we had most Sundays since Susan died. Roast chicken, which I'd been making from her recipe for 30 years and still managed to get slightly wrong in some way each time. Noah said it was perfect. He always said that. He was a better man than I deserved. After dinner, we moved to the back porch with coffee. Hank came out and settled between our chairs with a groan that was more contentment than complaint. The sky above the farm was clear and deep, the stars sharp the way they get on cold, dry Georgia nights, the Milky Way visible as a pale smear from south to north. We sat for a while without talking. This had become a habit between us. The silence after dinner, the porch, the stars. Noah had told Dr. Price about it once, and she had apparently said it was one of the healthiest things two people could do together. Simply exist in the same space without needing to fill it. I hadn't known it needed a clinical endorsement, but I was glad to have one. Patricia called this week, Noah said eventually. How is she? Good. They've had 3 new families come in through the Charleston referral network. She's thinking about opening a satellite office. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. She asked about you. Tell her I'm well. She knows. She said she could tell from the last board meeting. He looked out at the dark shapes of the peach trees. She said you seemed lighter. I considered that word. Lighter. Maybe, I said. Noah nodded. He understood. I think that lighter didn't mean the weight was gone. It meant you'd learned to carry it differently. You'd found a better distribution. Some of it had moved from your chest to your shoulders, and from your shoulders to the work you did with your hands, and the people you sat with on Sunday evenings, and the decisions you made about how to spend the time you had left. Hank shifted and put his head on my foot. I looked down at him. 13 years old, gray to the shoulders, moving slower every month, but here, still here. On the evening Clara had intended to be my last. Hank had been the one who'd inadvertently taken what was meant for me and survived it. There was something in that I had never entirely worked out. I wasn't sure I needed to. Dad, Noah said. I've been thinking about what you said, about whoever sent the envelope. He looked at the sky. I think you're right. I think it was someone who couldn't come forward directly but needed someone else to finish what they started. Yes, I said. And I keep thinking. He paused. The timing. It arrived the afternoon before the rehearsal dinner. Not a week before. Not a month before. That afternoon. Like whoever sent it knew exactly how much time you would need. I had thought about this too. Many times. In the quiet evenings since October. What are you saying? I said. Noah was quiet for a long moment. I don't know exactly, he said. I just think some things happen with a precision that's hard to account for. He looked at me. Mom was a precise woman. I looked at the bare peach trees against the night sky. Susan had been precise, deliberate. She had never done an important thing carelessly or left something significant to chance. She had written, I need to tell Walt about her, and she had meant to. She had been one day away, and then one day became never. And 31 months later, an envelope appeared on a porch step with no return address and no postmark, and my full name in block letters. I didn't know. I would never know. That was the truth of it, and I had made my peace with it, or something close enough to peace to live inside. But I also knew this, whatever had set things in motion. The work had been ours. The long, careful, patient work of following what the evidence pointed to, of not looking away from what was difficult, of trusting the gut even when it was inconvenient. Susan had taught me that. It was the most important thing she'd ever taught me. Pay attention, trust your gut, and never let the people you love face the dark alone. She was, I said. She was a very precise woman. Noah smiled. Not the performed smile, not the careful smile, but the real one. The one that lived in the corners of his eyes the way Susan's had. We sat with that for a while. The stars moved their slow degrees across the Georgia sky. Hank breathed steadily against my foot. The farm was quiet the way good farms are quiet at night. Not silent, but settled. Full of small sounds that belong. After a while, Noah said, "Same time next Sunday? Same time," I said. He drove off down the gravel drive at 9:30, his taillights red in the dark until the trees took them. I stayed on the porch a few more minutes with Hank and the cold December air and the stars. I thought about Susan. I thought about Noah. I thought about the 23 families who had found their way to a gray-green room on Price Street and sat down across from someone who understood what they were carrying. I thought about a plain white envelope on a porch step. No return address. No postmark. My name in block letters. Some things you carry. Some things you put down. Some things you build with. I didn't know who had sent the envelope, but I thought I had a pretty good idea. I went inside and turned off the porch light and left the stars to do their work without me. If this story found something in you, I'm glad. Elder fraud is not a distant thing. It happens in ordinary places to careful people who love their families and trust their instincts until someone gives them reason to doubt themselves. If you are a parent or a child of a parent, pay attention. Trust your gut. Ask the questions that feel inconvenient. The inconvenient question is usually the right one, and if something feels wrong, don't wait for proof to act. Walt Greer didn't wait for certainty. He acted on attention and patience and the knowledge that the people he loved were worth protecting. You have that same knowledge. Use it. If this story meant something to you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have a thought about it, a question, a story of your own, leave it below. I read every one.